All right, 2 years ago, this July, the college sports world was rocked by the firing of Northwestern University's head football coach, Pat Fitzgerald. He was let go after a group of student journalists at the Daily Northwestern uncovered a culture of hazing and harassment within the football program. And one of those student journalists was Alyce Brown. She's from the Quad Cities and worked on the student newspaper at Pleasant Valley. 2 years ago, we interviewed Alyce about all of this, and now she's just a few weeks away from graduation. So what's next for this rising young journalist? Well, we can get this answer straight from the source. Alyce Brown joining us now here on The Current. Alyce, congratulations on graduating. Does it feel real yet?
It does not feel real yet. I still have a little ways to go, but it's definitely things are winding down over here and it's starting to feel very strange, but I'm excited.
Well, I would be excited too. You already have a job lined up. Tell us, what are you going to be doing next?
So I'm going to be heading out to New York to cover women in sports for the Associated Press.
What does that mean? You get to cover all women in sports events?
Yeah, so I'm going to be covering all women's sports, but the focus is kind of going beyond game stories and just recaps and things like that. And so it's kind of been described as a position at the crossroads of sports and gender. So any stories where gender affects sports or sports affects gender are kind of the stories that I'm going to be looking into, and some longer form things just about how women's sports are rising right now and the stories behind all these new leagues.
I love it. And you get to cover all sorts of sports, or are you focusing in on a couple in particular?
I think it's going to be a pretty wide variety. I know I'm going to be focusing a decent amount on New York sports because that's where I'll be. I'm covering a decent amount of the New York Liberty, their WNBA team, and then doing the US Open, which is obviously out there. But also traveling a little bit. I know I'm doing the WNBA draft, so I'll be doing a lot of basketball coverage. Hopefully, a lot of coverage on the new leagues that are coming up, like the PWHL and the Professional Lacrosse League. So it'll be a pretty wide variety depending on where the stories are and what storylines emerge.
That is going to be so much fun. And what a great time, too, with the W just heating up for the summer, right as you get into this job. So I got to
Mhm.
ask you, what are you most excited about with this new chapter in your life?
Well, I am very excited to get to New York. It's moving to New York and being a journalist has been a dream of mine since I was a high schooler at PV and working on the Spartan Shield. So I'm really excited to kind of take on a position based out there. And I'm very excited that the AP is investing in a position like this and that they value these stories enough to kind of bring on a person to work on them. So I'm excited to be able to cover these leagues and these women in a point where the takeoff is kind of happened and now we're in a new era. And I feel like we're kind of just entering that where last year was kind of starting and now I feel like we're kind of fully in it. So I'm excited to kind of be on the front end of a new era of coverage of women's sports.
Let's talk about that. Is there something about mainstream sports media that you think that can be overlooked or maybe even still get wrong when it comes to women's sports?
I do think, and this is part of the reason why I'm so excited for this position, is I do think sometimes women's sports coverage isn't afforded the depth that men's sports coverage is, partially just because men's sports coverage has been, deeper and for longer. But I think a lot of women's sports coverage is based, on gamers and on recaps. And then recently we've seen, of course, the stories of women's sports is taking off. But I think beyond that, there are so many things further below the surface that are interesting to dig into, like the business of women's sports, which I think people are starting to report on more now as it blows up, in the business behind these new leagues and the finances behind these leagues, and then looking into the personal lives of these athletes and how they've changed with these changing tides, as well as with these new leagues, how these women who now have an opportunity to play their sport professionally are kind of handling that when they thought they would have to end after college. I think there's so many human interest stories, now that there are so many more women that are able to play their sports professionally, that in the past there haven't been as many resources afforded to, but now I do think that most news outlets are catching up to that and putting more resources and reporters on those stories.
I love it. Alyce, in the few seconds we have left, really fast, you interned at the QC Times, you wrote for the Spartan Shield. Are there lessons that you took from your time doing journalism in the Quad Cities that you're going to take with you to New York City?
Absolutely. I think my time at the QC Times and the Spartan Shield, shout out to my advisor, Mrs. Dyer, and to Bobby Metcalf at the QC Times. I learned a lot about how to um, I think be really ambitious in your reporting. Mrs. Sire and Bobby were both kind of my editors at those places, and they always encouraged me to kind of go after any story, and that really formed the basis of the journalistic career and the stories that I've worked on since then.
I love it. And Alyce, Bobby actually works for us now. We sit side
Oh
by
my
side
gosh.
with each other at our desks, so I'll tell him you said that. Thank you
Oh my
so
gosh,
much.
please do.
I will. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
If you guys at home want to check out our first story with Alyce from 2 years ago, you can head over to WQAD.com and click on the As Seen on TV tab.